Hello, everyone. Good evening. Sorry for the hiccup. There was an issue with the network. I hope you guys are able to hear me.
Yes, Ankit, go ahead.
Thank you. Welcome to AIQRATE webinar specials, the CXO series. Today's discussion would be on AI and design, human-centric approach and perspective. And we have Geetika Kambli, managing partner at Future Factory, with us to discuss on this topic. Samir Dhanrajani, CEO and co-founder at AIQRATE Advisory and Consulting, will be moderating this session. As usual, before we start the session, couple of housekeeping rules. A request all to be on mute for better listening experience, and also please keep your video off. Request all to share your thoughts and questions on the chat window of the WebEx for Q&A. We are also recording this webinar, and the playback video will be made available on our website www.aiqrate.ai and also on our YouTube channel. Now introducing today's guest, Geetika, with her MBA in marketing, an engineering degree, and a strong design practice, brings an unusual confluence of business, technology, and design to her work at the Center of Behavioral Research at Future Factory. Geetika is focused on designing technology through a user-centered design approach. Over the past 15 years at the center, she has helped consumer and technology companies as well as government and industry bodies across Asia launch successful products by leveraging consumer behavior. Geetika's work has been published by Springer in Europe and ABP in India, and she advises academia on business design and innovation through her affiliations at Wellinger University, Mumbai, and Mälardalen University, Stockholm. She also holds a committee position at CII's Innovation and Technology Group, where she promotes a task force on consumer behavior for technology. At a personal level, Geetika is committed to the cause of keeping women at work and continues her work towards a more gender-inclusive workforce in the country. Geetika, thanks for joining us in today's CXO webinar series. We'll now hand over the session to Samir. Samir, thank you. Samir, session is yours now. Thanks.
Thanks, NK, for the introductions, and pleasure to have you, Geetika, at the CXO series session. And I must say, this session is unique. This is our 45th session. And over the last, I would say, 44 session, something what we would be discussing about AI and design is something what we haven't covered. And there is a genesis. I keep on saying very clearly that AI itself is not enough. I think while it's being touted as the game-changing phenomena across industry, but the biggest challenge, and that challenge is very perceptible, it's very imminent. The challenge over there is the adoption. How do you create those pathways, frameworks, and very, very simple methodologies to ensure AI gets into the organization, it's embedded, it permeates, and it really becomes a kind of a, let's say, transformative set of exercise. However, something called AI and design have come in the last few years. And design element per se is something which is not often being talked about, but gradually we have seen ample instances in the past and in the recent where design is at the fulcrum of AI. I just want to start the conversation by taking your perspective and inputs. How do you see this whole design perspective from a standpoint of view of AI coming to the picture?
Yeah, that's a good question to actually start with. So I'll tell you what, I was in a client workshop last week, and we had a very interesting conversation about how the innovation imperative now is not so much about
Geetika,
how to make...
sorry, your video is not visible.
Okay. Is that better now?
No, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
All right, let me give this a shot. Do let me know if you can. Yeah, Samir, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay, why don't you start the narrative? That's fine, actually. That's fine. Please go ahead.
Okay.
We can't see you, though.
I think this is the beauty of how we've got all the fabulous technologies and we don't have enough bandwidth to manage voice and video streaming. But let's hope the network comes up back again. I'm actually at work right now and there are a bunch of people using the network, so maybe that's an issue. But I just come back to what you talked about, when you said adoption is key and how do you kind of figure out where AI and design are interacting. And as I was saying, I was in a client workshop recently and we were talking about how the innovation imperative has changed from, how do we make technology feasible, which was a question on the table as less as, 7 years ago, to how do we make sure people start using the technology so we achieve scale. And that's a very interesting shift because now we're saying we're not talking about development as a challenge, but we're talking more about adoption as a challenge, which was your first point. And AI is one of the technologies. I mean, there was a research we did recently where, innovation is on the CXO agenda and AI, tops the list there. So AI has been very, very touted as the thing that you can't be left behind on. But I think what's missing in the CXO agenda is how they're going to use AI. And design is really one of the key factors, what I would say, an unusual suspect for an application for AI. And I think that's very exciting. It's a very exciting time for us, especially because design has always been seen as a very, right-brained, creative field with very little to do with the technology part of things. And we're beginning to realize more and more about how there is so much of technology that can power design, AI being a very, very strong part of it. And how can we then use both AI and other methods to inform design so that we can start increasing outcomes like adoption? And that's the agenda on the table right now.
But also, if I take what you said, I think this whole proposition around human-centric design, design for the subconscious mind, because the fact over there is that I think there is a phase where we talk about AI as a black box, and despite algorithms, machine-enabled algorithms becoming very strong, the external facade is always designed because this is what consumers and the customers see that day in, day out. And unfortunately, in many of the scenarios, the end part or that external facade is always a bit esoteric in many of the situations or also complex. Now, just would like to understand, and this is something I'm sure our participants and audience would also like to hear. Give us some specific instances or some kind of examples which you believe from the industry where this whole approach of human-centric design, and I'm also trying to dovetail behavioral search, and I'll come to that in terms of taking your perspective about this whole stream of behavioral search, but give us a sense around this whole dovetailing of human-centric design along with behavioral search. How is it kind of unraveling a lot of new areas in terms of making the adoption easier than it was earlier?
Yep, very, very exciting to see. I'm just going to, kind of contradict you a little bit right here to say that design is not just the interface anymore, and we are seeing a lot of traction with industry to figure how we can design the product itself or the service itself. And that's an exciting time for us because you're absolutely right. I mean, as less as 7 years ago, 5 years ago even, industry would come to us and say, okay, you're a design and innovation organization. Here's my interface I'm a media company. Here's my interface, design the interface. Or, I'm a healthcare company, design my breath analyzer, let's say, for example. And I think the expectations from design are going up, which is why we need technologies like AI to power us, behavioral sciences to power us, and actually, increase the outcomes for what we're. So I'll give you an example. Take the example of a financial services company, and we're talking about delivering outcomes here, right? So let's say, you're looking at a retail banking application, and you're looking at a savings account, and you're saying that, look, you know what? We had that boom of financial inclusion where we were looking at increasing the number of savings accounts. And now there's a business imperative at banks, especially at the public sector banks, to say, how do we reduce NPAs? Because at the end of the day, there's a cost to set up that bank account. And we want to increase the transactions of that account to make sure that we recover that cost, And that's the business imperative we're trying to reach. And how can design do that? And how can you inform design to do that accurately? So, we use behavioral sciences to really understand why are people opening up accounts. And it's very useful to say, typically, on an average, an Indian would have 2 or 3 savings accounts, right? Easily. And what's driving that is that they like to compartmentalize their fund and their spending. So they're using that to say, okay, here's my account number 1, where I'm going to pay my kids' school fees. And, hey, guess what? I'm going to use it only once a year, right? And here's another account that, I'm going to pay my electricity bill from, and, all the Swiggy and the Ola, and, okay, not so much Swiggy and Ola now, but right? You get the drift. So, and that's the one I'm going to use all the time. And so you have one account which is used and the others that's barely touched. And if you get that kind of behavioral data and give it to design and say, how do you design the product itself? What should a savings account look like? And let's now look at technology, right? Let's not just talk about an interface here. It's very likely that the product manager, will turn around and say, you know what? Technology can allow us through feedback loops, through, traceability, through, accountability, through a user interface access. We can actually have one single account that can be compartmentalized, operated, monitored, and administered. And now that's innovation. That's real innovation. And I think that's where the mandate is. So we live in very interesting times because businesses are expecting that kind of change from design and innovation. And we can do that because we're powered with all of these new technologies.
Truly said. But let me also peel some kind of layers out here, and that would be more, I would say, interesting for the participants. If we talk about these two disciplines, AI, design, poles apart. I've often seen those scenarios where the two teams are sitting, different disciplines, different competencies, different skill sets. And it's always like, okay, there is some kind of a, let's say, logjam in terms of the discussions over there, because of course, the perspectives or the kind of dimensions of thinking what they bring to the table is unique. How do you see this getting blended, dovetailed, and intertwined in terms of creating a very meaningful approach for the customers?
Now that, I think, is entirely design's fault. And that is something I think as a community we just have to come around to accepting. The idea of design has changed so much that our inability to speak the syntax of technology is a serious issue. As a community, I think that's got to have to change. So I'll give you an example of something that you might be able to reference. About 15 years ago, we're a 25-year-old company. About 15 years ago, we set up what we call the INT, the Innovation Technology Division at Future Factory, which would interface with design. And we had the same issues, right? We would put like an automotive or a graphic designer sitting right next to a mechanical or a mechatronics engineer, right? And they would be in the same team. And it was chaos, right? And if you ask me, I think when we look at product development as a whole, I'm using that word loosely for all kind of technology development, The risk lies in the interface of the disciplines that work, whether it lies between technology and design, like you mentioned, or whether it lies between sometimes development and marketing, right? Because they speak different languages as well. And that is something that I think an organization that sees itself playing strongly in this area needs to address and maybe lead industry towards that. I'll give you an example of a project we did, I think we finished the project maybe 2 months ago. And it's very exciting to see the interfaces in the way they're working out. This was a project for a pharmaceutical company. And we used a team of mechatronics engineers to create a product. And that product was connecting with a software which was using AI technology. And it was using that AI technology through an imaging interface to check the growth of pathological organisms and send a report back to the lab on the results of that. So now we have 3 very, very extreme disciplines. We've got engineering, which is very hardcore steel and hands-on product. And then you've got, technology, which is very ethereal and very core pure science for like an imaging system. And then you've got AI, which is, speaking completely different language, algos and rules. And if all 3 of them don't interface, you don't get this product out. So you put your finger on, I think, one of the biggest challenges. The guys who can fix this are seeing tremendous acceptance in the industry. The guys who can't fix this, forget having a conversation or communicating. They're just not able to address the risk in moving that project towards completion.
Got it. There is also a scenario, and you said it very rightly in terms of these, what I call situations where how different teams come together and try to create an impact, and some of their, I would say, alignments or orientation needs to be done to kind of ensure that there is an end result which is always, I would say, more transformative as part of the impact. If we take one more dimension over there, behavioral search, and that's something which I'm sure has caught the fancy of many of the folks in the market, because we are here talking about personalization. Products and services are getting designed bespoke, customized, and very, very, I would say, personalized, micro-segmented kind of a thing on with the usage of technologies. However, the aspect around how the human behavior tends to change also needs to be captured by the companies. I want you to dwell some aspects about this whole field of what we call behavioral sciences, behavioral search. Tell us something about how this field has evolved and how it's kind of making its good entry and foray into this whole aspect of AI as well.
Yeah, super. So I'm going to take the liberty of answering your question first and then bringing up something that I think would be interesting. Not
Sure.
entirely an answer to your question, but I think it'll be exciting. So let me answer your question first. The whole idea of using a human-centered approach is basically by saying, let's put human understanding before design, right? So, I mean, let's not undermine the ability of the industry. We know that we have to be user-centered, right? But development has always been about, here's the technology or here's the design, now let's go test it, right? But it's not been designed by being user-informed. We haven't used research at the beginning to inform us, whether that is AI or whether that is, the softer behavioral sciences. And that's been a big shift. So let me give you the example of, how we've kind of used this in, let's say, financial systems again, and how we did a research recently, and we realized that 40% of India's population is under 25, right? So we did a research to understand how is the behavior of this generation, the 25 and below young generation, towards payments in general. And we're not talking about digital payments, but payments in general. And we realized very surprisingly that they are totally credit averse. Now, this is surprising, I mean, Samir, I don't know how old you are, but I'm in my 40s. And if I think of my parents, they were very, very credit averse.
I'll reserve saying my age in the forum, Geetika. But you said it right. That's very interesting. Say that again, what you said, that they are credit averse. That's what you're saying, majority of them?
Yeah. And we thought, it's the older generational cohorts that are credit averse because they come from, a very risk averse behavior. They come from a behavior where income was not as elastic. I mean, the economy pre-91 was really something else. But the younger generation shouldn't have that issue, right? Yeah. But surprisingly, they did. And if you understand that, it's a very impactful behavior because when they reload their digital wallets, they don't use credit cards because they're credit averse, right? And if I'm a credit card company, I'm going to worry because not only have I lost the game to digital wallets, I'm also not plugging in anywhere in the ecosystem of that, right? But if you look a little deeper and understand why they are credit averse, it's very interesting. There's a behavioral principle that we call loss aversion. And, in basic parlance, what it says is that humans will prefer to look at a decision or an opportunity to say, how can I reduce my loss rather than say, how can I exploit that opportunity? And this is not by personality, right? Loss aversion is a generic tendency. Now, when you understand that, you realize that at 25-something, it really doesn't have income stability. I mean, we've all been in college, right? You start smoking the best cigarettes in the beginning of the month and you're doing BD by the last week because there's really no money left. So they're very worried about not being able to service the debt or the credit that they've, logged out. And so interest-free credit for them is a big issue. Now, when you understand this, you understand what's driving it. And that's a big problem for an industry which says, you know what, 25 and below don't have the money. They're running out by the end of the month. Let's give them a line of credit. And they don't buy it. So what essentially I'm trying to say is that the whys of what's happening is often something that we can get from the softer sciences like behavioral sciences. And we get the what from AI, but we don't always get the whys. And having answered your question, I'm going to take the liberty to, bring an interesting point up. I'm sure you'll have a perspective on that. So we were talking to an e-commerce giant recently. They're also operating a digital wallet. And interesting observation. He said, you know what, Geetika, AI is giving me a lot of the answers, right? I do a ton of analytics, which rightly so, a company of that size should do. And, I know that 60% of my users are women. And I said, fantastic. That's brilliant information, right? But please tell me what you're going to do with that piece of information. And I think that's the key question we have. We have that question on the table even for AI, right? What are you going to do with that piece of information? Now, if I know that a majority of my target group is women, I'm going to say, okay, how can I use that? Maybe I'll just target women in my digital marketing.
Right.
And that's the most obvious thing I can do, right? But if I use behavioral sciences and understood why are 60% of my target group women, I might realize why men are not. And that means I now have an understanding for 100% of my target group, not just 60%, right? I might even be able to understand what makes women buy a particular kind of a service. And how might I use that information to push the rest of the stuff on my portfolio, which is, again, much, much more powerful than a targeted segmentation on digital marketing. So now I'm not only powering marketing, but I'm also powering experiences, experience design, I'm powering product development, I'm powering service design. And I think, that's the power of when you bring more than one, service or discipline into the picture. I don't know, what's your experience on this?
No, I think it's been awesome what you said, because I think it's a very, I would say, one topical perspective, a very fresh thinking, because for one of the clients I remember, in my previous organization we worked, and it's a large financial services client based out of Europe. And that's exactly was the conversation with the chief analytics officer that, look, I'm doing a lot of analytics to study frauds, to understand anomalies, and also point specific detect what could be the reasons in terms of kind of a thing, finding the anomalies, patterns, and kind of those aspects about the risk mitigation approaches. But somewhere he heard that, look, as part of this whole aspect of behavioral science and search, it's also a question, why do frauds happen? And that's something. So going under the skin and really thinking around that whole aspect of then saying, look, this is the fundamental reason. If we can ascertain, then the credibility of data and algorithms to power, I would say, or rather to get more kind of lit up, to get more insights, will be much more enhanced and accentuated as opposed to a standalone reason of just kind of putting an algorithm with a bunch of data. And that also brings to a question, and I'm being a bit provocative out here in terms of eliciting your response. Market research. I mean, I remember the days when I started my career with Gillette, in fact, and it was I would say, most strategic tool the CEOs and the CXOs were using, market research. I mean, I don't want to name the companies, but you know whom I'm talking about, that, okay, they were all building those powerful kind of set of research analysis by categories, by kind of, let's say, products. But today, because of this advent of AI, where everything is real time, it's now and it's happening, there's something called ethnographic profiling which is coming. And you know it better than anyone else about this whole aspect of ethnographic profiling, spelling out more enhanced understanding to the marketeers and to the product designers to kind of really get under the skin of the consumers and see what new products should be ushered or kind of created. What's your thinking around this whole market research versus behavioral research?
No, so super. So I'm first going to answer the provocative question with a provocation. Okay. I know that this is going to get published. I'm going to get a lot of flack from a lot of my contemporaries. But I wrote a recent article on how market research has failed 2020. And I think you're bang on, right? I mean, if I go back as long as you went back, I started my career with the FMCG giants, with Unilever and J&J, best training ever on user research. But so much has changed, and I think market research has not adapted, right? I mean, let's simplify it. Market research is two parts. There's data collection, and then there's the inciting and the prescriptive part. And unfortunately, market research has not let go of the data collection. Now, in a time like this, data collection has pretty much no meaning, Samir. I mean, AI and, big data notwithstanding, even primary data collection has so much more efficiency when it's connected on the internet, etc. Right?
Absolutely. To the point you said, Geetika, that T plus 15, 45, 30 days is outdated concept today, because quarter to quarter is what is the demand of the companies, and that whole refresh cycle time seems to be absolutely out of whack in terms of the lag.
No, you're totally right. I don't think any business today that is serious about tech can wait 30 days for an answer. It can wait 7. In 30 days, it has to create that tech and get it out, and maybe do an A/B testing as well, right? And get some early feedback in a more agile testing environment. And I think, what we've done is that, I'm now going to shift to your second part of the question. There's this whole die-hard community of ethnographers, and I should say, because I like to think of myself as one of those, that the real world experience can't be mimicked through speed. Yeah, I've got to watch people as they do the task. Ethnography technically comes from the kind of work anthropologists would do to study tribe as they moved to understand culture, right? So that kind of deep subconscious understanding about human behavior. And as we talked, it can be very, very useful to inform businesses on how to do, achieve adoption, scale, all of that, right? Sure. But I'm not sure that it can't be adapted. So at Future Factory, for example, we're working on a platform where we're taking ethnography digital. Because you have the technology to do it. You have cameras, you have scale, you have a bunch of other advanced technologies. We're in a phase where we're trying to leverage AI to also help us do that. But you can have real-time conversations with people in their environment, right? So I'm not sure that it can't. I don't think there's anything wrong with the science. I don't think there's anything wrong with the theory. And I think the ability to understand nuances in human behavior are fabulous in terms of, complementing studies like AI. But we've got to become agile and adaptive and take them to different mediums, because things like speed and scale, we need to bring to the table, right? And that market research is not doing. That's something we have to do.
So think of this, and this is quite splendid in terms of what response you gave, and exactly something which I wanted you to be, which is provocative, because that's something which I think we believe we are at a cusp where the technologies are getting more sophisticated and getting to a stage where they're almost challenging the intelligence of the humans. But on the other side, this whole scenario about what I call adjacent segments, behavioral science or design thinking, user design, needs to come in fast so that this whole rationale of understanding those subtleties and nuances gets more amplified. But here is one thing, and this is, I'm sure, if I don't ask, I'm sure we'll get a question, and maybe this is the right juncture. What possibilities of new careers, new roles this is throwing up, Geetika? Because 5 years back, if you and me would have had the same conversation, I don't think so we would have been discussing about this. But today, as you rightly said, it's spawning new roles and opportunities around this area. And being at a vantage position in terms of what you guys do, give us some sense about what kind of new opportunities and job-specific, I would say, roles which are opening up in this area.
Yeah. I'm not sure we'll get a designation around that, but I think the, the confluence of your hardwired technologies like your AI data, I'm just calling it a trifecta, if I might say, of big data, analytics, and AI, right? Let's just bunch them together because they're kind of dependent on each other, right? You have data that's powering analytics, and AI is like this advanced system that's sitting on it, but you have that one group, right? And then on the other hand, you have the softer sciences that are actually pointing out the nuances, explaining the whys, giving you direction on what to do on product development, on design, like behavioral sciences, some of the qualitative work that we have in this space. And I think if you were to look at a wish list designation of a behavioral scientist, then that bloke actually has to be able to work in the overlap of user and technology. And there's a bunch of work that's already happening in that space. But like we talked about earlier in this conversation, that there aren't too many companies that have perfected that interface. But if we do, and we can, create a behavioral scientist who manages the overlap, here is an example where it can be used. So let's go back to the same example of, the big potential in India being the less than 25 years of age. Right. And let's take the opportunity of insurance as an industry. Very, very underplayed in this market. Terrible penetration, right? For several behavioral reasons, but we can talk about that another time. Now, if we had to really drive market growth here, more from, penetration point of view, what if we could actually hit the younger group? Now, from simply an operational perspective, we can't do that because we can't judge the credit worthiness of a 25-year-old. He has no credit legacy. There's nothing to check. He's not made any money. He's not spent any money. So how do you figure out what his credit worthiness is? And there are a lot of work happening in other developed markets, which we can do in India, So for example, if you're doing a general insurance bit and you want to check the creditworthiness of someone without a credit history because you're trying to grow the market, right? So you look at proxy, which are behavioral data, such as the legacy of traffic violations, for example. And in India, we don't have that data. So in India, we use studies like the personality theory, which has a lot of data. The personality theory is, it has at least 3 decades of longitudinal data sets to power that research. But you use that theory, and it very clearly tells you that Mr. A is a certain personality type who is likely to have a risk profile of ABC, and is likely, to have a certain exposure or a predictability of XYZ, if he was to be on the road. Now,
Right.
That's almost like AI, right? I mean, it's like creating a predictive model. But it can't be done only by behavioral sciences, because behavioral sciences doesn't work with the kind of data sets that we need for this kind of work. Yeah, I know that there is evidence that AI can work with limited data sets, but it's not really informative or prescriptive at a large scale. But AI can do that. Now, if we were to train AI data using this kind of behavioral work, and because these are principles, right? Like I said, there's 30-year-old, validated data that we can use. If we were to train the algorithms on that data set, imagine what you can do for the insurance industry. So the opportunities when you start interfacing these two sciences is tremendous for us to go ahead. And I think that is the big opportunity for us to go. It's not just pure AI. AI is the ability to morph, blend into other things. And that's where its potential really exists.
Awesome. No, so I think you said the right thing, and I'm just trying to also ruminate about this thing, what you talked about, and I was trying to think through the companies which are very much on the social media side, the Facebooks, the TikTok, of course now it's been banned, the Instagram. I think the sheer profiling and the sheer bunching or micro-segmenting what they have done in terms of getting this whole set of, I would say, entrusted community together. Give us a sense. I mean, this is something where we're talking about a large segment of population coming on board around the social media or this platform. And somewhere, I'm sure these organizations are using behavioral science, design thinking, the whole aspect of being more specific in terms of user design kind of, let's say, needs. How do they go about kind of building this whole facet of understanding their consumers?
Yeah. Very exciting work there.
Mm-hmm.
We've barely scratched the surface. I mean, so everybody knows about social listening, right? And how analytics is helping to power that. And, how AI can also take that to a very different scale. But as of now, social listening is, again, like a data gathering methodology. Like, it's making the same mistake that research did, which is it's kind of focusing on picking up 1 million data points rather than 30 or 40 data points, like a typical, small research would be able to do at a primary level, and creating a landscape of, or a map of information. But if you were to actually layer some behavioral work on it, that would be completely different. So behavioral research also informs culture. Now, some of the largest in the world are actually using social listening to inform culture. And culture can be very, very tremendous. It's kind of some of what we call the jumbo researches that you might do once in a while. Say, how is culture affecting the generation cohort on payments? How is it culture affecting the economy of trust for rural sectors and rural economies? How is culture affecting healthcare and the conflict of data and privacy? What does privacy mean to people when they're using data, and how does that impact healthcare at the point of care positions, right? So there's a lot of work around culture that can inform you, which has a very, very close tie-up to social listening, because social listening is actually giving you the kind of micro understanding about the motivations that are powering a person's allegiances, his values, what he stands for. And there's a lot of opportunity there. But what's happening, unfortunately, is that it's getting done at a macro level, and it's getting done at an executional level. When it gets done at executional level, it's just data collection. So it's again the same 60% of my users are women. What do I do with it? Right? When it has the opportunity to inform not just why women are buying it, but what are the cultural changes that women are perceiving and how that's changing their allegiances towards the brand, not just the category or the service, and how you might, change communication towards that, which is all in the area of advertising or communication or messaging, which is, the social media marketing space. And the opportunity for us to do that again, I think we're struggling with the ability for behavioral sciences to match scale. And
very interesting point what you said, right?
Everyone else is, that's something I think unless we're able to, do the behavioral scientists, like we said, unless we're able to train AI data or understand how AI works, which is why I feel that as researchers, we need to understand technology so that we know how we can integrate ourselves into that technology. And then, the ability to inform for real disruption and real change is tremendous, not just from an execution perspective.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and that's where I think, and I'm just trying to take some of these things, what you said about this research which was done from an India perspective, and this whole aspect about a specific set of young population coming out with their own set of understanding. India specifically, we have seen in the last few years a lot of new initiatives being launched, whether it's Jan Dhan for the financial inclusion or Swachh Bharat campaign for hygiene, or we're talking about, let's say, the tax reforms, just to sort out the whole aspect about compliance. What's your sense about all these major, large, and even complex set of reforms? Can they be solved while, of course, they're trying to use AI over there? Can they also look at the whole aspect of behavioral research and design thinking coming into the picture to solve these problems?
Yeah, I really think so. I believe that we've done some work with foundations and governments, but I would say few and far between, not enough. And, at this stage of my career, I really wish that we were able to create more social impact, while we create a lot of commercial impact. So let me just give you an example of how this might be, right? I mean, think of what we're going through right now at the pandemic. What we really want to do from these kind of initiatives? If, let's say, I'm a government body, right? What do I really want to accomplish? What's my outcome? What I really want to do is I want to design behavior, not the product or the service. I want to influence, lead, guide public behavior, right? I mean, we've read millions of reports about how awareness of social distancing is not really encouraging social distancing, right? We're understanding how this terrific scare on don't wear a mask and you could die, and people are still walking around with masks on their chins, right? Not on their noses, And it's not because they're stupid, right? It's not because they're stupid. They understand the risks, but there are reasons why they're not doing that. So one of the things we found out, when we did behavioral work, is that wearing a mask is like wearing a helmet. You're on a bike, you're young, and if you don't wear a helmet, there is a chance that you have an accident. It could be fatal, but you still don't wear a helmet, right? And the reason you do that is because you have something called an optimal bias, which essentially means that, I know people die, but it's not going to happen to me, right? There's this human behavioral principle that says, I'll block out that the worst can happen to me. And we use that very strongly when we inform insurance companies, for example. All the messaging that you put on rationally doesn't have any effect. So how do you design behavior by using emotional responses that can connect to a person's what we call schema and understanding, not the rational part of the brain, right? How would you create messaging that would connect with them to make them wear a helmet, or make them wear a condom, or make them wear a mask? It's the same principle, all the same, right? And I think
True.
that's something that we have an opportunity to do now, because it's literally life-threatening. It's literally the most important prerogative we have on the table now. And for government to seize it, for organizations to seize it, I would say CSR to seize it, there's a lot we can do right now. So yeah, I think the initiatives can work, but I think it's not awareness that will solve this. I think it's behavior change that will solve this, because these are really deep-rooted social issues. And we can do this with AI, we can do this behavioral design, we can do this with quantitative work, we can do this with big data, but we need to look at it in a different sense. We need to look at empathy and emotion, and not just dissemination of information.
True, very true. I think that's something which resonates well. Just want to take some aspects, Geetika, about what you do, which is Future Factory. I mean, give us a sense about your firm. What's the kind of work you guys are doing, and how you're trying to create some transformative, innovative, disruptive set of, I would say, things for your clients.
Okay, yeah. So we started as a design company about 25 years ago. And so that's, I think, the DNA that drives everything we do today. But if I were to define us, I think we're more a tech company than a design company today, because we use technology to achieve, the creation of solutions. And we use a bunch of technologies to do it. So my work in Future Factory is that I head the Center for Behavioral Research, which is why I've been talking so much about human behavior and how that guides design. We have another division called INT, where we lead innovation and technology, where the big lever for change and disruption and design is technology, right? So I think that's an interesting perspective. What we've been able to build is something unique. And what we really stand for is, how do we overlap the disciplines of user, technology, and design to create what we want to for the future? And that's what guides everything we do. So, most of the projects, I would say almost 85% of, maybe 90% of the projects we do today uses more than one of these disciplines, at least two, if not all three. And technology is almost always at some level a player there. So what we've been able to do, I think, for a lot of clients, more than designing interfaces, is, let's say a financial service company or an entertainment company or a consumer internet business, is to design experiences using technologies that can actually make leaps on the barriers. How do we increase adoption? How do we increase claims processing? How do we disrupt the time for, discovery of, online entertainment media? How do we speed up streaming using AI and, personalization using customized experiences? So it's a bunch of all of these things, right? On healthcare, how can we use behavioral sciences and technologies to create, user testing, to create drug delivery, point of care testing, patient empowerment? So these are more midterm, a little more ambitious kind of projects that we do. And I think the ability to use technology along with design is tremendous. I don't think there's enough of that work going out.
Fascinating. Now, I think this is one stream, one discipline, one area I call, Geetika, is everyone should know, everyone not only should read, but really see what difference or what kind of substantial, significant kind of, work which is happening in this space. And it's I would say, really great to kind of hear what you guys are doing. And this is something what I call is what will actually really see what I call that eventually the new age exponential technologies, as we call it, whether it's AI, IoT, cybersecurity, or even blockchain, may not have that relevance unless it's substantiated by I would say, a right dose of user design, design thinking, behavioral science, because that's where this whole aspect of what I call, putting that right masala comes in, because that's where it's talking about giving a kind of a right taste and a right kind of, let's say, aspect to the recipe, because that's exactly what clients are looking. I just want to take a couple of questions in the interest of the time, and something which I think we haven't explored as part of our conversation is about this whole aspect of, on one side, we always give this instant and illustration and example about Apple. This whole fascination about minimal design, maximum functionality is a rage. Uh, but it's hard to copy. It's hard to kind of emulate what they have done. But specifically, I think they bring this whole design element in the forefront and create new categories by virtue of their own understanding. Now, as you see today, many of the product firms, many of the firms which are punting big on the product development side, where do you think they, or rather, what do you think they should be doing to enhance their product features, functionalities, and services by using behavioral search, behavioral science, and even user design? What's your feel around that? What should be done over there? Because I think, to me, I think looks like they're more fascinated with the technology. Then I would say the whole aspect about the other side of the thing, which is design and I would say the behavioral science. What's your take on that?
No, I think you're very right, Samir. What I hear you say again and again is that there is technology for technology's sake, and then there's the application of it.
Correct.
And a company like us is working in the application of that technology. That's why we interface it with design. That's why we interface it with behavior. That's why we interface it with use cases, right? At the end of it, it is how can we use that technology to meet our metrics, whether it is NPS or adoption or scale or profitability, whatever it might be. And I like the word you used when you said, I think you said exponential technologies, right? Blockchain, I mean, if you ask anyone in the tech industry today, they'll say blockchain is just not, it's not exponential anymore. It's just expected to be used, right? Given the fact that digital payments have moved to where they are, authenticity, fraud has, become an everyday issue, and we were moving to international payments as well. So how do we, and seamlessly, if we have to, allow these transactions to happen, how are we going to use these new technologies to come in? And I think, for us, I think what I would like to say is that technology doesn't have to be disruptive. And I think that's the first thing that we have to educate business about. It's all about mitigating risk, right? Any kind of development is about mitigating risk. Technology is not disruptive. The application of technology in the right dose at the right place can happen in different ways. So, we have this framework at Future Factory, which we call step, jump, and leap, right? And in simple parlance, I can use AI as a leap project, or I can even pick it up and use it as a step project, which means I can get something out in 6 months, in an industry which has never seen AI, and make it work.
Right.
And I would encourage the community to see how they can use these promising technologies to demonstrate success, right? So I know Apple is, it's heard and said and done, and there are many different perspectives to it. But, here's what's a very, very interesting thing to do. What if we had on one hand all the promising technologies that have reached what you call exponential technologies? Let's say they've reached what we call an inflection rate, right? Take sensors, for example. We know that sensors are easy to use today in applications because they're cheap, because there's an ecosystem to develop them. They're accessible, right? That was not the case as less than 7 years ago. And that's the reason that IoT is picking up the way it is right now. So there are a bunch of technologies which we can review and say, are they at the inflection stage? And now you look at the other side of things and say, can I visualize an experience using these technologies? Can I just create like a Hollywood film seen, like a Minority Report did in 2011, you know.
Correct.
If you see the film, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that has come true today, right? I mean, sure, they did their research, but it's storytelling, it's visualizing, and design is about that. How can I imagine what I can create using that technology? You know, bring all that storytelling out and say, look, this is what I want to do. And now that I have the creative vision on the table, now comes the rigor and the hard work. How do I check feasibility? How do I check viability? How do I do the numbers? How do I do risk assessment, which is also the job of design, right? As much as storytelling is. But if I can do both pieces, right, that's when I can deliver something that's fabulous. And it doesn't have to be disruptive. It just has to be fantastic.
Got it. Amazing. We would have loved to continue, Geetika. We've had time, but must say, I mean, in the last 60 minutes, and as I was expecting, I think this is nothing short of a pot boiler. I would say gripping, fascinating, and absolutely riveting because not only you made it easy and I would say quite easy to kind of, let's say, comprehend and relate, you also punctuated your entire narrative with anecdotes and a lot of, I would say, sense of rationale because in the sense because this is a theme which, as I said, is uncharted, not explored, but there is a great work which is happening, and that's exactly what you brought to the table, you brought to the forum, and really appreciate you talking about that. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure getting you at this forum, and thank you so much to all the participants.
Yeah, fabulous, Samir. I had a great time. It was most enjoyable. I hope the participants have enjoyed it as much as you and I. And look forward to having more discussions around such wonderful topics. Thank you for having us over. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.